That afternoon, the sky turned gray and it started to drizzle. The Tubmans decided to drive to Bar Harbor. That's the town where all the tourists go. It got hundreds of little shops selling t-shirts and sayings about Maine, like cool as a moose in Bar Harbor or Maine 50 miles from nowhere. Count me out, Libby said. I've got to be to work at 3. Count me out too, Sheila said. The Hatchers depend on me to babysit Fudge. But Mom convinced Sheila she deserved an afternoon off. If you ask me, everyone is feeling sorry for the Cootie Queen just because Mouse got sick and couldn't come to Maine. Everyone but me, that is. Still, I felt relieved when the Tubmans left. I hope they go out for pizza and catch a late movie, I thought. I hope they like the action in Bar Harbor so much they decide to stay for a week. They still weren't back when Mr. Fargo called from town, asking Mom for directions to the house. That was a good sign because by then it was after 6. I waited on the porch. When I saw Mr. Fargo's truck, I ran down to the road. His truck is really old, with rust spots around the fenders. It's painted the color of bile. Not that I ever seen bile, but last year in school, we learned about the digestive system. That's the way I imagine it, a sick greenish-brown color. Turtle barked. It's Jimmy, I told him as I waved Mr. Fargo into our driveway. At first, Jimmy couldn't get out of the truck. The door on his side wouldn't budge. He kicked it a couple of times, then banged it with his shoulder. Finally, it creaked open. By then, we were laughing. Turtle jumped up and tried to lick Jimmy's face. Good boy, nice doggy, Jimmy said, patting him. Turtle knows a friend when he sees one, I said. Jimmy gave me a bear hug and we slapped hands. It was great to see him. But that didn't stop me from checking over my shoulder. I hoped the Tubmans wouldn't show up now. Jimmy also took a look around. You were right, he said. You can't even see Sheila's house from here. I guess it's through those woods over there. Well, see, I began. But then Mom opened the front door and called to us. Inside, Dad had a fire going in the big stone fireplace. Fudge was stretched out on the floor with his Crayolas, illustrating chapter 1 of his book. Tootsie was scooting around on her toddler bike, and Grandma was reading. She put down her book to greet Mr. Fargo. Jimmy headed straight for Uncle Feather's cage. Bonjour, he said. Bonjour, Uncle Feather answered. Jimmy laughed. Good old Uncle Feather. Please, Jimmy, Mom said, don't encourage him. Once you get him going, it's hard to turn him off. Turn him off? Turn him off? What do you mean? See what I mean? See what I mean? I motioned for Jimmy to sneak away from Uncle Feather's cage. Jimmy got down on all fours and crawled across the living room, out of Uncle Feather's sight. As he did, Tootsie held up her arms out to Mr. Fargo. Up, she said, up. Mr. Fargo lifted her high above his head and shook her. Tootsie loved it. She has this thing for bearded men. She'll raise her arms and say up to any guy with a beard. Mom says it's because Dad used to have one, but I'm not too sure. We're going to have to teach her to be more careful. Mom took Tootsie from Mr. Fargo. Thanks for driving Jimmy all the way, Frank, she said. I know what a long trip it is. Used to come up here in the old days, Mr. Fargo said, with my ex-wife. You remember my ex-wife, don't you? Uh-oh, I thought. I hope he's not going to start in on Mrs. Fargo because Jimmy really hates that when he does. How about something to drink, Frank? Dad asked. I was glad he changed the subject. Some fizzy water if you have it, Mr. Fargo said, coming right up. Mom smiled, but I could tell she was tense. A lot of people get tense around Mr. Fargo. I think it's because he never smiles, even when he's trying to be friendly. How about this Maine weather? Mom asked. You have to have weather, whether or not, Mr. Fargo said. Jimmy groaned. That's such a bad joke, Dad. I heard a car pull into the driveway. Oh no, I thought, not now. The car doors slammed, and a minute later the Tubmans came bounding up the porch steps and into the house. Sheila headed straight for the fire. It's so cold, she began. She stopped when she saw Jimmy. Oh, it's you. What's she doing here? Jimmy asked. I'll explain later, I whispered. But Sheila explained for me. I happen to live here. This happens to be my house. I thought this was your house, Jimmy said to me. Well, see, I began. We share the living room and the kitchen, Sheila said. We eat breakfast and dinner together every day. Jimmy looked at me. I don't get it. It's like two houses in one, I told him. It's like they're connected. Connected? Jimmy said. Yeah, joined together? I said. I looked over at Sheila. She was enjoying this. Joined together? Jimmy said. Sheila laughed out loud. I glared at her. See, our family lives over there, I explained, pointing to our side of the house. And her family lives over here. And the living room and the kitchen are sort of in the middle. Jimmy just stood there with his mouth half open. Sheila picked Jake up and started kissing her. Isn't my dog adorable? She asked Jimmy between smooches. I thought you were afraid of dogs. Jimmy said. She is, I told him. That's not true, Sheila said. I just don't like big, smelly dogs. Turtle, who was asleep in the corner, raised his head. Attack, I told him mentally. But he didn't get my message. He scratched himself and went back to sleep. Sheila carried Jake over to Jimmy and put her in his arms. Rubber belly. She loves that. Jimmy held Jake like a baby. She's so soft. This was too much. I was glad when Dad called. Dinner's almost ready. Pasta with Anne's special sauce. Mr. Fargo suddenly came to life and said, Better get our things inside, Jimmy. When Jimmy and his father went out to the car, Mom said, Did he say our things? He meant Jimmy's things, I told her. I hope so, Mom said, looking worried. But then Jimmy carried one duffel bag into the house, and Mr. Fargo carried another. I don't have much, Mr. Fargo said. Just this and my art supplies. You planning to stay with us? Mom said. No point trying to camp out in this weather, Mr. Fargo told her. From the look on Mom's face, I thought she might faint. There was a long, awkward silence. Finally, Dad said, You can have the sofa in here, Frank. It's the only available space left. Unless Grandma sleeps with Buzzy Sr., Fudge said. Then I can sleep in Grandma's bed and Mr. Fargo can have the rollaway. Everyone looked at Fudge, including Mr. Fargo. Don't go into any trouble, he said. The sofa looks mighty good to me. Later, when Jimmy and I were in the bathroom getting ready for bed, he said, I'm really embarrassed about my father. Anybody can see you've already got too many people in this house. It's no big deal. I handed him a clean towel. Yeah, right. That's how come your mother almost fainted. Only because we're out of beds, I said. You think my father cares about beds? He likes to sleep on the floor. It's okay. Forget it. Jimmy spit out toothpaste. You know he's weird. He doesn't mean to be, but he just is. He's not that weird. I flushed the toilet, which reminded me of my poison gas story. Look, I said, I'm embarrassed too. I should have told you about sharing a house with the Tubmans, but I didn't find out until we got here, and then, well, I was afraid if I told you, you wouldn't come. I probably wouldn't have, Jimmy said, but now that I'm here, it doesn't seem that bad. I was glad I wouldn't have to lie to Jimmy after all, and telling him the truth wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. Still, couldn't help wondering how he would have reacted to my story. I decided to find out. As soon as we were in bed, I said, "Did you hear about the poison gas?" "What poison gas?" "The poison gas in the toilets." "What toilets?" "Some guy up here, he had poison gas in all his toilets." "What do you mean, poison gas?" Jimmy faced me and propped himself up on his elbow. It was this green, steamy, gurgling stuff. Bubbled up every time he flushed. Green, steaming, gurgly stuff? Jimmy started to laugh. "It's not funny," I said. "It's an environmental disaster." "An environmental disaster?" Jimmy said. "Where'd you read that? The National Enquirer?" You don't think it's possible?" "Yeah, I think it's possible, if the guy ate something that didn't agree with him." Jimmy broke up laughing. "Ha ha," I said, as I reached over and turned out the light. "Ha ha," a voice repeated, and it wasn't Jimmy. I jumped out of bed and opened the door. Fudge was sitting on the floor outside of my room. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "I don't know." "Didn't anybody ever tell you you're not supposed to listen to private conversations?" No." I picked him up and turned him upside down. I held him that way until his face turned purple. "Put me down, Pete." "Not until you promise never to do that again." "Okay, I promise." I didn't believe him for a second, but I put him down anyway. "Now go to bed." "I can't." "Why not?" "I'm afraid of the rollaway." "The rollaway can't hurt you." "Yes, it can. It can mash me up. So I'll sleep in here with you and Jimmy." "No, you won't." I carried him down the hall and dropped him on the rollaway bed. Grandma and Tootsie were already asleep. Fudge listened to Grandma, who was snoring softly. "No monsters tonight," he whispered, pointing in her direction. "Right," I whispered back. "Now go to sleep." "Tuck me in," he said. I tucked him in. "Now kiss me goodnight." I was about to drop a little one on his forehead when he reached up, grabbed me around the neck, and pulled me down. Then he planted a big wet smackaroo right in the middle of my face. "Sweet dreams, Pete."